This is the first time Iran has attacked without a preemptive strike by the US or Israel. Just let the sheer weight of that statement sink in for a second. That's a direct assessment from Dr. Hamida Raza Azizi over at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. And honestly, it highlights a massive, unprecedented break in military protocol that has just sent shockwaves through the global intelligence community. For years, the unwritten rule of engagement in this region was strictly reactionary. But today, the entire playbook has basically been thrown out the window. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into this massive geopolitical shift, Iran's preemptive strike and the looming retaliation. We're going to unpack the exact economic and political data driving these decisions and strictly follow the latest intelligence to understand how the global board has just been completely reset. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the unprecedented first strike, unpack Iran's calculated timing, and then examine two critical U.S. vulnerabilities, dwindling missile stocks and historic oil reserve lows. Finally, we'll break down the planned retaliation and Israel's strategic shift. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the unprecedented first strike, breaking the unwritten rules. To really grasp the scale of what's happening, we need to look at the timeline. According to international reports, this current conflict technically ignited back in February with a U.S. operation dubbed Epic Anger. But the dynamic flipped completely over a rapid 48-hour window. Just the day prior to our current situation, Iran fired ballistic missiles directly at a U.S. base in Jordan. That alone was highly irregular. But then, on the current day, the maritime security firm Ombre reported a drone strike targeting a U.S.-owned liquefied natural gas, or LNG, facility in Damietta, Egypt. This strike actually triggered a fire at the storage and transport facility right there on the Mediterranean coast. Look, this isn't your standard proxy skirmishing. This is a direct, rapid-fire succession of first strikes.
Moving on to Section 2, Iran's calculated timing, the political leverage.
So that brings us to the big question. Why launch a first strike right now? I mean, if the unwritten rule has held up for so long, what changed today? To figure that out, we actually have to step away from the battlefield for a second and look straight at the political calendar. According to a really interesting analysis by the Japanese outlet Nikkei, Iran is acutely aware of the constraints currently facing the U.S. administration. With the November midterms creeping up, there's just massive domestic pressure for a clean, quick resolution. So, Iran is escalating tensions to force a favorable diplomatic outcome. Specifically, they're looking to revive some very favorable MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding terms. We're talking about getting access to frozen overseas assets and locking in an end the war first, negotiate nuclear issues later kind of dynamic. Basically, they're using this first strike aggression as sheer diplomatic leverage.
Which brings us to Section 3, dwindling U.S. missile stocks, the defensive strain.
Here's where things get really complicated. The U.S. defensive shield is currently under severe strain. Based on recent think tank analysis, the U.S. interceptor missile inventory is running on less than half of its original capacity. It's actually depleted down to just 35 to 40% of pre-war levels. When you're constantly absorbing drone and missile fire, a shrinking stockpile like this is an absolute critical vulnerability. Let's put some hard numbers to that. According to estimates from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, as of July 27th, America's premier defense systems are hitting some finite limits. The Patriot system inventory, that's down to an estimated 759 to 827 remaining interceptors. And the THAAD system, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, is sitting at just 234 to 278. Iran knows this math, and they are definitely testing its limits. Let's turn to Section 4, historic oil reserve lows, the economic pressure. 307.7 million. I really want you to remember that number. That is the exact barrel count of the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve as of recent reports. According to the Financial Times, U.S. commercial crude inventories dropped by 7.2 million barrels in a single week. And the Strategic Petroleum Reserve dropped by 3.8 million barrels in that exact same time frame, bringing us right down to that 307.7 million mark. To put that into perspective, 307.7 million barrels represents a 43-year low. This is literally the lowest the U.S. reserve level has been since its early stockpiling days, way back in March of 1983. And objectively speaking, falling oil reserves naturally threaten to spike oil prices and, by extension, drive up inflation. For an incumbent administration heading into a tight midterm election, rising inflation is just an incredibly heavy political burden. It's a domino effect. Iran strikes energy infrastructure, the global supply gets nervous, U.S. reserves are too low to flood the market and stabilize things, prices rise, and bam, inflation hits the U.S. voter. It's a highly calculated chain reaction. All right, let's move to Section 5, the planned retaliation, moving to the offensive. As you might expect, the rhetoric coming from the U.S. has shifted dramatically. In a recent interview with Fox News, former U.S. President Donald Trump delivered a pretty stark warning, stating, "We'll beat them up, now it's our turn." This is a clear signal of an impending, severe response. And the Wall Street Journal has actually reported on the military blueprint being proposed for this retaliation. Reportedly presented by CENTCOM Commander Brad Cooper, this plan is massive. Cooper is proposing up to 2 weeks of sustained, large-scale airstrikes. The goal here isn't just to send a message. The objective is to substantially neutralize Iran's missile capabilities altogether. Cooper reportedly argued that a simple tit-for-tat response just isn't going to break the current deadlock. So this represents a complete rejection of the previous defensive posture. We're talking about moving to a massive offensive designed to permanently alter the adversary's capability. Finally, let's look at Section 6, Israel's strategic shift, a new defense paradigm. So, how is the region's other major player reacting? Well, during a recent White House meeting, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu presented a radical shift in their long-term defense strategy. To give you some context, from 2019 to 2028, Israel relied on roughly $33 billion in direct U.S. military aid. But the new proposal for the next decade? It pushes towards zero direct military aid. Instead, they're requesting $5 to $10 billion earmarked strictly for cooperative air defense development. It's a fundamental pivot toward national self-reliance, laser-focused on the exact defense systems currently being tested by all this incoming fire. So we've seen the break in military protocol, we've looked at the depleted missile stocks, those 43-year lows in oil reserves, and the massive counteroffensive currently on the drawing board, which leaves us with this one final question. With U.S. reserves at historic lows and an unprecedented 2-week retaliation imminent, how will this sudden escalation fundamentally reshape the Middle East?